Let's just jump right in. We are looking at a case today that I think for a lot of people really redefined how we consume true crime. It feels recent, but the story actually starts all the way back in 2008.
It really was a watershed moment, no question. It completely changed the media landscape, the legal landscape, and, it absolutely changed how the public interacts with the justice system.
Totally. We're talking, of course, about the death of 2-year-old Caylee Anthony and the subsequent trial of her mother, Caylee Anthony. And I want to start with the core paradox here. The thing that I think, even all these years later, people can't get their heads around.
Mm-hmm.
You have the toddler, Caylee, who vanishes. She is gone for 31 days, a full month. And in that entire time, not a single person reports her missing to the police. Not one call.
That's the number, isn't it? 31 days. It's the number that just defies all logic for any parent or, really for anyone who's ever looked after a child for an afternoon.
Right. And then you fast forward, it's 2011, you have this trial that absolutely captivated the entire country. People were skipping work to watch the live verdict. The mother, Caylee, she gets on the stand and admits she lied to the police repeatedly.
Over and over again.
And she still walks away.
Yeah.
Acquitted of murder.
Yeah.
How does that even happen?
That is the million-dollar question. And I think for a huge portion of the public, the answer was just the system failed. Simple as that. But our mission, with this deep dive is to go a bit beyond that.
Yeah, we have to.
We want to move past the tabloids, past the Nancy Grace headlines, and believe me, we will get to her because she's a huge part of this story's ecosystem.
Oh, yeah.
And we want to really examine the actual evidence. We need to look at the competing legal strategies from both sides and dig into the specific nitty-gritty forensic details that led 12 jurors to land on a not guilty verdict, even when the court of public opinion had already sentenced her.
Yeah, we're definitely peeling back all the layers on this one. And just so you listening know where our information is coming from, we're basing this whole discussion on the comprehensive records of the investigation itself, the full trial proceedings for State of Florida v. Caylee Marie Anthony, plus post-trial revelations that came out years later, and of course analysis of the media coverage itself. The stack of source material here it's pretty dense.
It's extensive, and it's so important to stick to the record with this case because there are just so many rumors, so much misinformation floating around. The actual nuance tends to get lost in all the outrage.
Okay, so let's set the scene. We are in Orlando, Florida. It's the summer of 2008. And the key date, the one everyone needs to keep in their mind, is June 16, 2008.
That's the day. That is the last day that 2-year-old Caylee Anthony was seen alive by her family.
And the key players are pretty straightforward. You have Caylee Anthony, the mother, who was 22 at the time. You have Caylee, the toddler. And then you have George and Cindy Anthony, Casey's parents, the grandparents.
Right. They're all living together in a multi-generational home. On the surface, it's a pretty typical suburban setup.
So Caylee is seen leaving that house with her mother on June 16th. And then just silence for a whole month. So let's dive into that first section, the 31 days and the web of lies, because this is really where the prosecution built its entire case, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The prosecution's strongest weapon, if you look back at it, wasn't necessarily a smoking gun or a piece of irrefutable forensic evidence.
Right.
It was Caylee Anthony's own behavior after the disappearance. The entire argument was essentially this: how does an innocent mother act when her child has vanished? And Caylee's actions were, to put it very, very mildly, inconsistent with a grieving or panicked parent.
Inconsistent is maybe the most generous word you could possibly use. So June 16th, Caylee leaves the house. She tells her mom, Cindy, that she's taking Caylee to the nanny. And this is where we get introduced to a name that would become infamous, Zenaida Zanny Fernandez-Gonzalez.
Zanny the nanny. This was Caylee's story. She claimed that this nanny, Zenaida, had actually kidnapped Caylee way back on June 9th. But here's the part that just makes no sense. She doesn't tell a soul about the supposed kidnapping for an entire month. Instead, she tells her own mother she's off in Tampa on a work trip. She's sending texts, making calls, giving updates, acting like everything is completely normal.
She's just keeping up this total charade.
All while her daughter is supposedly in the hands of a kidnapper. It's just bizarre.
But she wasn't actually in Tampa, was she?
No, not at all. She was in Orlando the entire time. She was staying with her new boyfriend, Tony Lazzaro, hanging out with friends, going to clubs. And as for Zanny the nanny, well, the police investigation on that was pretty revealing.
What did they find?
They found the apartment complex Caylee pointed them to, but the specific apartment she claimed was Zanny's. It had been abandoned for over 140 days. It was completely empty. There was a thick layer of dust on everything. No toys, no clothes, no furniture, and certainly no nanny.
So the nanny, the entire story, was a complete and total fabrication from day one.
A complete fabrication. Now, here's the thing. There was a real woman named Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez in the area, but she had never, ever met Casey or Caylee Anthony. It seems Casey just plucked a name out of thin air. Maybe she saw it on an old apartment visitor log or something, and then constructed this entire persona around it to explain where her daughter was. Zanny was a phantom.
Wow, okay. So while she's spinning this incredibly elaborate story about work trips and phantom nannies, what's actually going on? Because a lie that big, eventually the house of cards has to come crashing down. And it seems like it all started with her car.
It did. The car is the catalyst. On July 15th, 30 days after Casey and Caylee left the house, George and Cindy Anthony get a notice from an impound lot. Casey's car, a white Pontiac Sunfire, had been abandoned and towed.
And so George, the grandfather, he goes to pick it up. He's a former law enforcement officer, right? That's an important detail.
It is. He had experience with crime scenes, with death investigations. He wasn't just some random guy.
So he gets to the impound lot, opens the door to his daughter's car, and what does he find?
Well, he later testified that when he got near the car, even before he opened it, he was hit with a very distinct, very strong smell coming from the trunk. And he described it on the stand as the smell of human decomposition.
That is just a haunting detail. A former cop, a father, smelling his own daughter's car and instantly recognizing the scent of death. That must have been an absolutely visceral, gut-wrenching moment.
And it wasn't just him. The tow yard manager, Simon Birch, he noted it too. He said it was one of the worst smells he'd ever encountered in his years on the job. But when they opened the trunk, there was no body. There was just a bag of trash with some old pizza and other garbage in it.
But George was adamant.
He was adamant. He knew the difference between rotting food and a decomposing body. He said it was a smell that once you smell it, you never, ever forget it.
And that smell, that lingering stench, leads directly to the 911 call. This is probably one of the most famous, most played 911 calls in modern history. Cindy Anthony, the grandmother, makes the call on July 15th.
She actually made a few calls that day, each one escalating in panic as she couldn't get a straight answer from Casey about where Caylee was. But the one that was played endlessly on the news is the one where she finally just screams it out. She says, "It smells like there's been a dead body in the damn car."
Wow.
And then she tells the dispatcher, "I haven't seen my granddaughter for 31 days.
Like someone died. That is such a raw, primal reaction. Now, I know later on, and we will get to the trial specifics, but Cindy tried to walk that back, didn't she? She sort of changed her story.
She did. At the trial, under oath, she claimed it was just a figure of speech. She said she was being dramatic because she was frustrated and wanted the police to come faster. But in that moment, recorded forever on that 911 tape, the sheer panic in her voice and the very specific description of the smell, it was incredibly damaging to Casey. It basically set the entire tone that the family suspected the absolute worst before the police even showed up.
So the police finally get involved. 31 days later, they start questioning Casey. And this is where we get what I call the Universal Studios incident. This, to me, is the moment where you just have to shake your head and wonder what on earth was going through her mind.
It's a moment that truly demonstrates her commitment to the lie. It's almost pathological. So Casey had told the investigators she worked at Universal Studios as an event planner. This was a key part of her work trip to Tampa narrative. So on July 16th, the detectives basically called her bluff. They say, "Okay, show us. Take us to your office."
And she doesn't back down. She doesn't say, "Oh, actually, I was laid off." She said, "Sure, let's go for a drive."
She agrees. She gets in the car with them. She drives them to Universal Studios. She talks her way past the security guard at the gate. She leads them into one of the main office buildings. She's walking them down a hallway, literally waving at people she passes, acting the part. "Hey, how's it going?"
Unbelievable.
They get all the way down this long hallway before she finally stops, turns to the detectives, and calmly admits she hasn't worked there in years.
She hadn't worked there since 2006, I think, right?
Correct. She had been fired not long after she took maternity leave. It had been almost 3 years.
Can you just imagine being one of those detectives, walking down that hall, watching this whole performance unfold, and then just the whole facade just crumbles in an instant?
It's chilling because it shows a level of calculation or, maybe deep delusion that is just so hard to wrap your head around. And for the prosecution, this was pure gold. This is a textbook example of what lawyers call consciousness of guilt.
Right.
Their argument is simple. If this was all just a terrible accident, if Caylee simply went missing, why construct such an elaborate, easily disprovable lie? You lie like that because you have something to hide. Massive something.
Exactly. If your child accidentally drowns or gets lost in a park, you call 911 immediately. You don't spend a month pretending to work at Universal Studios.
Yeah.
So, Casey is arrested. The initial charges are child neglect, giving false statements, and obstruction of an investigation.
Right. But at this point, July 2008, there is no body. Caylee is still officially a missing person.
And that strange limbo just dragged on for months. I remember the grandparents, George and Cindy, they were all over television. They did an interview on the Today Show, and they were maintaining that Caylee was still alive.
They were clinging to hope, or at least they were publicly. They said they believed she'd been kidnapped by this Zanny the nanny. There were massive searches organized. Volunteers came from all over. Money was being raised. But behind the scenes, the police were pretty clearly zeroing in on a homicide investigation.
And this brings us to the next critical phase, Section 2, the discovery of remains. Because while this whole media circus is raging, there's a meter reader named Roy Kronk who is repeatedly trying to tell someone about something suspicious he found in the woods.
Roy Kronk is such a pivotal and in many ways a tragic figure in this case because of how he was treated later by the defense. But back in August 2008, so this is just a month after the investigation started, Kronk is doing his rounds in a wooded, swampy area very close to the Anthony home. I mean, practically in their neighborhood. He sees something suspicious.
What does he see?
He sees what he thinks is a skull inside a gray plastic bag. He calls the police tip line.
And what happens?
Nothing. No one calls him back. He calls again a day or two later. He's persistent. Eventually, a sheriff's deputy, comes out to meet him. Kronk points toward the area where he saw the object. The deputy does a quick visual search from the roadside, says he can't see anything because of high water, and then he just leaves.
You have got to be kidding me. So the remains were likely there in August, just a stone's throw from the house, and they were completely missed.
That's what it looks like. It wasn't until 4 months later, on December 11, 2008, that Kronk, who was back in the area for work, saw the object again and called the authorities for a third time.
And this time they listened.
This time they went into the woods, and they found a trash bag. And inside that bag were the scattered skeletal remains of a small child.
And it was quickly identified as Caylee.
Yes. Dental records confirmed it. Dr. Jan Garavaglia, who was known to TV audiences as Dr. G, was the medical examiner who confirmed the identification. The search was over.
Now let's talk about the state of those remains, because the details of what they found become absolutely huge in the trial. It wasn't just bones in a bag, right? There was also duct tape.
Yes. This was arguably the single most contentious piece of physical evidence found with the body. There was duct tape discovered with the skull, but because the body was fully skeletonized, all the soft tissue was gone, the exact positioning of that tape was a matter of intense debate.
So what was the prosecution's take on it?
The prosecution argued that the tape had been wrapped around the little girl's nose and mouth, suffocating her. They had a forensic anthropologist create a model showing how 3 pieces of tape could have perfectly covered her airways.
That's a horrific image to present to a jury.
It is. The defense, however, argued something completely different. They said the tape was found near the skull, not physically attached to it, or that it had fallen off after decomposition. They suggested it might have been placed there after death to stage the scene, or that it had nothing to do with the cause of death at all. Their point was, since there's no skin, you can't prove it was ever actually on her face while she was alive.
And what did Dr. G, the medical examiner, say? She ruled it a homicide.
She did. But, and this is the absolute critical ambiguity that the whole case pivots on, the official cause of death was listed as homicide by undetermined means.
Undetermined means. That just sounds like a prosecutor's worst nightmare.
It is a massive, massive hurdle. You have the medical examiner basically saying, look, we know this wasn't a natural death. You don't find a 2-year-old skeleton in a trash bag in the woods if she died of pneumonia. So the circumstances scream homicide. But biologically, scientifically, she couldn't prove how she died.
There was no physical proof of the act itself.
Exactly. There was no broken hyoid bone to prove strangulation, no bullet hole in the skull, no knife marks on the bones, no poison detected in what little tissue remained. It was a blank slate.
So you have a who, the mom, according to the state, and you have a where, but you don't have a definitive how.
Precisely. And that gap, that undetermined void, is exactly where the defense team, led by Jose Baez, would later plant all the seeds of reasonable doubt. Without a clear mechanism of death, the defense can argue anything, an accident, a drowning, a seizure, and the state has a very hard time disproving it with pure science.
Which brings us perfectly to Section 3, the trial itself. This kicks off in May of 2011. And it really was a tale of two completely different realities being presented to the same 12 people. On one side, you have the prosecution arguing for first-degree premeditated murder.
The state's theory was brutal and, very straightforward. The lead prosecutor, Linda Drain Burdick, argued that Caylee Anthony was a young mother who felt completely burdened by her child. She wanted to live what they called the bella vita, the beautiful life.
The party life.
The party life with her boyfriend. And in their narrative, she viewed her daughter Caylee as a direct obstacle to her freedom.
They showed those photos, right? The infamous ones of her dancing at clubs and in that hot body contest while Caylee was missing.
Yes, the photos from a nightclub called Fusion. And then, of course, the tattoo.
The Bella Vita tattoo.
Right. During that 31-day period her daughter was missing, she went and got a tattoo on her back that said Bella Vita, Italian for beautiful life. The prosecution used that very effectively to paint a picture of a cold, unfeeling woman who was celebrating her newfound freedom, not mourning a lost child.
So what was their theory on the method?
Their theory was that she used chloroform to incapacitate Caylee, then suffocated her with the duct tape, put her in the trunk of the car, and then disposed of the body in the woods. Premeditated, cold-blooded, first-degree murder.
It's a very compelling narrative, especially when you look at all of her behavior. But then, Jose Baez, the lead defense attorney, he stands up to give his opening statement. And I don't think a single person in that courtroom was ready for what he was about to say.
It was an absolute bombshell. One of the most shocking opening statements in modern trial history. Baez stood up and he essentially admitted right off the bat that Caylee lied about everything.
He didn't even try to defend the nanny story.
No, he threw it all out. He called the prosecution's case fantasy forensics, but then he offered the jury a completely different story, the accident hypothesis.
Okay, break that down for us. What did Baez claim actually happened?
Baez told the jury that on June 16th, the last day Caylee was seen, she had accidentally drowned in the family's above-ground swimming pool. A tragic accident. But then he alleged that it was George Anthony, the grandfather, who found the body. And that George, in a moment of panic and trying to spare Caylee from being charged with child neglect or something worse, decided to cover the whole thing up. Baez claimed George disposed of the body and then forced Caylee to go along with the cover-up.
Wait, so the defense's entire story is Caylee isn't a murderer. She's a grieving mother who is traumatized and then forced into a cover-up by her own father.
That's it. And to explain away all of Caylee's bizarre behavior, the partying, the lying, the lack of emotion, Baez went even darker and more explosive. He alleged that Caylee had been sexually abused by her father, George, and her brother, Lee, for years, starting from a young age.
Oh.
He argued that this lifelong trauma had taught her how to lie, how to compartmentalize her feelings, how to hide her pain. So her party behavior wasn't joy at being free. It was a deeply ingrained trauma response.
That is a hell of a thing to throw in a jury in an opening statement. To accuse the grandfather, who was one of the prosecution's key witnesses, of not only a cover-up, but also years of sexual abuse.
It was an incredibly high-risk, high-reward strategy. George Anthony, of course, vehemently denied these allegations on the stand. It led to some of the most emotional and combative testimony of the entire trial, but it served a critical strategic purpose for the defense.
It gave them an alternative explanation for the lies.
Exactly. If the jury could be convinced, or even just entertain the idea, that the lies were a product of a deeply dysfunctional and abusive family dynamic rather than consciousness of guilt for murder, then the prosecution's entire foundation starts to crumble.
It effectively put George Anthony on trial right alongside his daughter.
Precisely. It muddied the waters. It forced the jury to question the credibility of everything and everyone coming from the Anthony household.
So we have these two completely opposing narratives battling it out. But a murder trial, especially a death penalty case, usually comes down to the hard evidence. So let's move to Section 4, the battle of forensics. Because there was a lot of science, or what was presented as science, thrown around in this courtroom, and a lot of it was, let's say, controversial.
Controversial is exactly the right word. You have to remember, this trial was happening at the absolute peak of the CSI era on television. Jurors were coming into court expecting high-tech, infallible, smoking gun evidence. The prosecution tried to provide them with that, but the defense was incredibly effective at challenging the validity and reliability of that science.
Let's start with the big one, the chloroform. The prosecution's theory was that Caylee used chloroform to knock Caylee out. What evidence did they have to back that up?
Their main piece of evidence came from the Anthony family computer. They had a software designer, a guy named John Dennis Bradley, who testified that someone using the computer had searched Google for the word chloroform 84 times in a single day.
84 times. I mean, it sounds like an obsession. It sounds like someone planning something very specific.
It does. It sounds incredibly damning. The testimony was that there were searches for household weapons, neck breaking, and chloroform 84 times. But, and this is a massive, massive but, it was revealed later that there was a fundamental bug in the forensic software Bradley had used.
A bug in the software.
Yes, the software misinterpreted the browser's cache data. The search for chloroform was actually done only once, and the full browser history suggested it might have even been part of a chain of searches related to chlorophyll for plants, or maybe even linked from a friend's MySpace page that had a joke about chloroform. The context was completely lost.
Wait. So the jury heard the number 84 times, but the reality was just once. Did they ever find that out?
Well, the full story of the software bug came out publicly after the trial was already over. There were reports that the prosecution was aware of a discrepancy and was about to correct it right as the verdict came down, but the initial impact had been made. However, during the trial itself, the 84 times testimony was somewhat mitigated by Caylee Anthony.
The grandmother.
Yes! In a surprise move that clearly stunned the prosecution, Cindy took the stand and claimed that she was the one who had made those searches.
She fell on the sword for her daughter.
That's certainly how it appeared. She testified that she was looking up information on chlorophyll for her bamboo plants and must have misspelled it. Now, prosecutors challenged this heavily. They produced work records showing she was likely at her job when the searches happened, so her testimony was pretty shaky. But it did just enough. It gave the jury an ounce of doubt. Maybe it wasn't Casey. Maybe it was Cindy.
Okay, so the chloroform evidence was shaky. Then there was the smell in the trunk. We talked about George and Cindy smelling death. But can you bottle that? Can you actually prove a smell in court?
The prosecution really tried to. They brought in an expert from Oak Ridge National Laboratory named Dr. Arpad Vass. He had developed a new experimental technique using air sampling. He took air samples from the trunk of Casey's car and claimed his machines detected the specific chemical signatures of human decomposition, as well as high levels of chloroform.
That sounds like something straight out of science fiction.
And that's exactly what the defense called it. Jose Baez labeled it junk science and fantasy forensics. He argued that the technique had never been used in a criminal case before, it was unproven, its results weren't peer-reviewed, and the chemical database Vass used was proprietary, so the defense couldn't even independently check his work.
So they just hammered its credibility.
Relentlessly. They argued the smell was just from the bag of rotting garbage found in the trunk. So you have the defense saying, that's not a dead body, that's a 3-week-old pizza in a trash bag. And the prosecution saying, no, a super secret machine says it's death.
And the judge allowed this testimony.
He did, which was a controversial ruling in itself, but the defense did such a good job of cross-examining Vass that they made the whole thing look, very experimental and unreliable to the jury.
Wow. And then you have the duct tape. The prosecution had an FBI fingerprint examiner testify about something they found on it, or rather, something they thought they found. The heart-shaped sticker. Heart sticker. On the murder weapon.
That was the implication. The theory the prosecution floated was that there had once been a small heart-shaped sticker on the piece of duct tape found on the skull. It was meant to imply a kind of cruel, twisted irony.
But was the sticker actually there for the jury to see?
No, that's the problem. The examiner admitted under oath that she couldn't actually see the sticker anymore. All she could see was what she described as a faint outline, or a residue that she interpreted as being heart-shaped.
So the sticker itself was gone.
It was gone. The defense, of course, called this phantom evidence. They basically said to the jury, they are asking you to convict a woman of murder based on a sticker that no one can see. It really felt like the prosecution was reaching, trying to inject emotion into the case because they lacked that hard physical link.
It really does seem like for every big piece of forensic evidence the prosecution tried to introduce, the defense had a way to just poke holes in it and say, yeah, but is that proof beyond a reasonable doubt?
That was the entire theme of their defense. The hair evidence was another perfect example. They found a single 9-inch long hair in the trunk of the car. An expert testified that this hair showed a feature called root banding, which is a dark band that appears near the root. He claimed this only happens post-mortem after death.
Which would be huge. That puts the body in the truck.
It would be huge, but the defense, again, brought in their own experts who argued This is new, unestablished science. You can't definitively prove that root banding doesn't happen in other circumstances. They neutralized the impact completely.
It feels like the prosecution was trying to push the boundaries of forensic science to fill that gaping hole left by the undetermined cause of death, and the defense just kept hammering on the reasonable doubt of it all.
That is the perfect summary of the entire trial. The prosecution was trying to build a complex puzzle, but the pieces just didn't quite snap together perfectly. They had a strong circumstantial picture, but all the edges were ragged, and in a capital murder case, those ragged edges are everything.
So we finally get to July 2011. The trial's been going on for weeks, the closing arguments are done, the jury goes into deliberation. And I remember watching this live on TV. Everyone, and I mean absolutely everyone in the media, was expecting a guilty verdict. Maybe not first-degree murder, but something. Manslaughter, at least.
The public sentiment was just overwhelming. The cable news consensus was that she was guilty. But then on July 5, 2011, the verdict is ready to be read.
Not guilty. First-degree murder, not guilty. Aggravated child abuse, not guilty. Aggravated manslaughter of a child, not guilty.
She was found guilty only on the 4 misdemeanor counts of providing false information to law enforcement. That's it. For lying to the cops.
The shock was just palpable. I mean, you could hear a pin drop in that courtroom, and then outside you could literally hear the screams of anger from the crowd that had gathered. Why? After everything, why did the jury acquit?
Well, we don't have to guess. We have insight from several of the jurors themselves, including the foreman and another juror, juror number 3, who have spoken publicly. And it all came down to 2 things: the lack of a proven cause of death and the prosecution's failure to meet the burden of proof.
They just couldn't get past that undetermined ruling on the death certificate.
Exactly. One juror said it very plainly. If you cannot prove what the crime was, you cannot determine what the punishment should be. They felt that without knowing for sure how Caylee died, they couldn't be 100% sure it wasn't an accident.
So they didn't necessarily buy the defense's drowning theory?
Not necessarily. They said they thought the whole family was dysfunctional and that Casey was obviously a liar. But they felt the prosecution failed to prove their murder theory, the chloroform and duct tape, beyond a reasonable doubt. The accident, while unproven, was a plausible alternative that the state couldn't disprove.
And this brings us right back to the CSI effect we talked about.
It does. It's a classic example. Legal experts analyze this to death afterward. Modern juries, they're raised on TV shows like CSI and Law & Order, where every case ends with a perfect DNA match or a video confession.
Right, a smoking gun.
A smoking gun. In this case, there were no fingerprints of Casey's on the duct tape. There was no DNA of hers on the tape. The cause of death was officially unknown. The evidence was all circumstantial: the smell, the computer searches, her behavior. And for a jury facing a death penalty case, they basically said, that is not enough to send a woman to her death.
It's interesting because circumstantial evidence is perfectly valid evidence in a court of law. Juries convict on it all the time. But for a layperson, it just feels weaker, doesn't it? It feels less certain than seeing a fingerprint on the weapon.
Especially when the life of the defendant is on the line. And we should note, there was some juror regret later. In 2021, one of the jurors gave an interview saying he felt sick about the decision years later. He said, and this is a quote, "I don't know what the hell I was doing." And he wished he had pushed harder to convict on one of the lesser charges like manslaughter. But in that room, under the pressure of the judge's instructions about reasonable doubt, they felt their hands were tied.
Let's talk about the public reaction, because this wasn't just a legal verdict. This was a full-blown cultural explosion. Section 6, the media frenzy and public outrage. Time magazine called it the social media trial of the century.
It absolutely was. It was constantly compared to the O.J. Simpson trial, but with this whole new added layer of Twitter and Facebook and nonstop cable news coverage. And you cannot talk about the media coverage without talking about Nancy Grace.
Oh, absolutely not. Nancy Grace on HLN. She was the one who dubbed Casey Top Mom.
Every single night, she was unrelenting. She basically prosecuted the case on her television show every single night for months. Her ratings went through the roof. She fueled this national obsession and this absolute unshakable certainty in the public's mind that Casey was a monster who got away with it.
So when that not guilty verdict came down, the public felt like they had been personally cheated out of justice.
They did. There were protests outside the courthouse. People were holding signs that said, "Justice for Caylee and OJ number 2." And interestingly, if you look at the polling data from that time, there was a massive gender gap in the reaction.
Oh, really? How so?
Polls showed that women were significantly more likely to believe Casey was guilty and to be angry about the verdict than men were. It was dubbed the maternal instinct theory. The idea that a mother killing her own child is such a fundamental affront to the very concept of motherhood that it triggered a much more visceral emotional reaction in women.
That makes a lot of sense. It feels like the ultimate betrayal of that biological bond.
And the fallout wasn't just emotional outrage. There was a flood of civil lawsuits. Zenaida Fernandez-Gonzalez, the real woman whose name Casey used for the fake nanny, sued for defamation because her life was absolutely ruined by being associated with the case.
I can't even imagine.
Texas EquiSearch, the nonprofit search and rescue group that spent thousands of dollars and man-hours looking for Caylee, sued for fraud. They argued Casey knew the child was dead the whole time they were spending donor money on a fake search. And Roy Kronk, the meter reader who found the body, he sued for defamation because the defense team had implied during the trial that he might have moved the body.
It was just a legal mess for years and years.
Right.
But let's look at the aftermath and where we are now, because some actual laws changed because of this case.
Yes, we got Caylee's law.
This was the big legislative push, right? Because people were just furious that it wasn't explicitly illegal to simply not report your child missing for a month.
Exactly. Casey didn't report Caylee missing for 31 days, and technically, that specific act of failure to report wasn't a felony in itself in most states at the time, not in the way people expected it to be. So states like Florida, Oklahoma, New York, West Virginia, they all passed versions of Caylee's law, making it a felony for a parent or guardian to fail to report a missing child to law enforcement within a specific short time frame, usually 24 or 48 hours.
So her terrible legacy, legally speaking, is closing that loophole. But there's one final huge piece of evidence that came out after the trial that I think haunts everyone who's ever looked closely at this case: the Firefox search.
Yes. This is the big what-if moment of the whole story. In 2012, a year after the trial, reports surfaced that the police forensics team had missed a whole section of the computer's browser history. They had checked Internet Explorer, but they had completely failed to check the history on the Firefox browser.
And what was on the Firefox browser?
A search for the term foolproof suffocation.
Foolproof suffocation.
Yes. And the timestamp on that search: 2:51 p.m. on June 16th, 2008, the very day Caylee was last seen alive.
And the user account that was logged in was password protected to Casey, wasn't it?
That is the report. Now, Jose Baez has since argued that this could have been George Anthony searching for suicide methods because he was depressed at the time. But the timing, the very day she disappeared, and the specificity of the method, suffocation, which perfectly matches the prosecution's duct tape theory. It is absolutely chilling. If the jury had seen that search, who knows what would have happened.
That is just incredible. Foolproof suffocation. It's so specific. It's not just a general search like how to kill someone. It's specifically about the method the prosecution had argued was used from the very beginning.
It is. And it's a stark reminder that digital forensics, even as recently as 2008, was still an evolving field. The idea of missing an entire browser's history seems almost unthinkable now, but it happened.
So where is Caylee Anthony today? She was acquitted. She served a short time for the lying charges, about 3 years total, including time already served, and she got out in July 2011.
She's tried to stay out of the public eye for the most part. She filed for bankruptcy shortly after her release. In 2017, she gave a controversial interview to the Associated Press where she said she sleeps pretty good at night.
That quote just enraged people all over again.
It did. In that interview, she maintained she didn't know what happened to Caylee. But then in 2022, she participated in a docuseries for Peacock called Where the Truth Lies. And in it, she changed her story again, or rather, she expanded on the defense's trial theory. She claimed on camera for the first time that she was under the cult-like control of her father, and she reiterated the claim that he was the one who staged the drowning.
And then, just recently, she popped up on TikTok of all places.
Yeah, this is the bizarre modern twist to the story. In March of 2025, she launches a TikTok channel announcing she's starting a new career in legal advocacy. She claims she wants to help women and the LGBTQ community who have been wrongfully accused. And she introduced a new narrative element claiming her pregnancy with Caylee was the result of being raped at a party.
It just feels like the narrative is always shifting, always evolving. But the one core tragic fact remains: Caylee is gone.
That is the ultimate tragedy. Amidst the media circus, the Nancy Grace rants, the battling forensics, the lawsuits, the TikToks, a 2-year-old girl died, and legally her death is unsolved. Medically, it is undetermined.
So let's wrap this up. Caylee Anthony walked free. The state tried to get her to pay for the massive investigation costs. They wanted over $500,000, but a judge ordered her to pay $217,000. She claimed bankruptcy, so they never saw most of it. It just feels like there was no satisfaction, no justice for anyone.
No, it's completely hollow ending.
I want to leave our listeners with a thought you brought up earlier when we were prepping for this.
Yeah.
The legal concept of a not proven verdict.
Right. In Scotland, their legal system has 3 possible verdicts: guilty, not guilty, and not proven. Not proven essentially means we think you probably did it, but the state didn't do a good enough job presenting the evidence to convince us beyond a reasonable doubt. In the U.S., we only have guilty or not guilty. And not guilty is often interpreted by the public as innocent, but they are not the same thing.
And that is the crucial distinction that really defines this entire case, isn't it? The jury didn't say she was innocent. They just said the state didn't prove she was guilty.
Exactly. And that leaves us with the uncomfortable final question. Did the system fail? Or did it work exactly as it was designed to, by protecting a citizen from the death penalty when the evidence, as strong as it seems circumstantially, just wasn't 100% solid? That's the question we all have to sit with.
That is a tough one. Thank you for walking us through this. It's such a dense, emotional case.
Yeah.
But understanding the why behind that verdict, not just the outrage, is so incredibly important.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
For those of you listening, if you want to dig even deeper and see the documents for yourself, the autopsy reports, the trial transcripts, just check out the source links for this deep dive. It's all there. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you on the next one.